Hi, my name is Brett Gordon, and I'm going to show you how I paint birch trees. So this is the palette that I'll be using for this tutorial. Praline green, which makes a nice dark forest color. Jadeite green for mid-tones. Serpentine green for some highlights with the yellows. And then I use brilliant pink as a highlight for the snow and the trees. Van Dyke brown, Prussian blue, which is a nice vibrant blue, teal blue for some more highlights on the trees. And then I use white gouache. I don't use watercolor because it's just too transparent. With the gouache, I can get a much thicker, more bright white. Even you can see right here, it's brighter than the paper itself. And then lunar blue and Payne's gray. And as I go into the tutorial, I'll show you what I use for brushes and some masking fluid. I use Arch's 140-pound cold press, not the hot press, but the cold press, because it's got the textures, nooks and crannies that I'm looking for to bring character to the composition. So I'm using Arch's 140-pound paper, and I'm going to be using some masking fluid in this painting, along with a ruling pen or a masking pen, which is a nice little tool because you can adjust the wheel for widths. If you want to put it on thick, or if you want to put it on thin, you can just turn that wheel and you can get a nice fine line. You can also use a quill pen, and this is what I also use for grass, which will be coming up through the snow. I use Neef brushes. They're not cheap, but they'll last 2 lifetimes. They're high quality and very soft hairs, hold a lot of water, and I'm using a medium as well. The first one was a large, and this one here is a smaller version of those brushes. I'm also going to use a liner brush. This is a Da Vinci, and again, not one of the cheaper ones, but you get what you pay for. So if you're into watercolor starting out, you just want to buy whatever you can afford. Buy the best thing you can afford. This is a Copic pen. Copic is made in Japan, and this is used for cartooning and line drawing. And I use it here and there for things like twigs and thin branches. I was planning on using this gel pen for white highlights, but I decided to go with the gouache instead. But it's a nice little pen if you want to use it in your paintings for highlights. And I'm going to use a normal shipping utility knife, or you can use an X-Acto blade, even a pair of scissors, in order to cut the tapes down into your trees. And there are certain tapes that you can try, painter's tape, like the one I just showed, masking tape, 3M masking tape, which I also use to tape down my paper. It's very inexpensive, and it does the job real well. And this is like a paper tape by Douai, and you can just tear the tape with your fingers if you're looking for textures on both sides, as you would in the trees that I'm going to be making. So I'm going to lay down a length of masking tape, and I'm going to, on the left, I'm going to cut away the top part of the tree, because trees are narrow at the top and they get thicker as they go towards the bottom into the ground as a trunk. You just don't want to just lay down strips of paper, because there are no such things as straight trees. They're pretty close. There are certain trees that are like poles, but with birch trees, you'll never see a straight one. They're narrow at the top, like most trees, and thicker at the bottom. So I just go ahead and cut away an area which will be the left and then the right side of the tree. So it's a little more narrow at the top. And you can put in little divots to give it some character. And I'm going to have two large birch trees in the foreground on the right-hand side of the composition, with a lot of medium width trees in the background. Not too many small ones. You can put some small ones way in the back if you want to. They'll be shorter pieces of tape. But for this exercise, I'm just going to stick to medium trees and a couple large ones, as though I was walking on a path on a winter evening, say around 4 o'clock, as the sun's going down. And I just randomly place these pieces of tape, taking note to make it pleasing to the eye. You don't want to just stick these right in the middle of the paper, but you want to arrange these tapes as you would your painting overall, to draw the viewer's focus into where you want him to see things that you've got going on. And so if there were stars of this painting, it would be these two trees. They're the stars, they're the highlight. I'm just going to make a horizontal line. The bottom will be snow, and the top will be a forest. And now I'm just going to put in a little indication for where I want the sun, the center of the sun, to be shining through the trees. So I just pulled off a strip of painter's tape, and I'm going to make a bunch of trees out of a single piece. So I start narrow at the top, and I get a little bit wider towards the bottom. And then when I go to make the second tree, I start wide, and then I go narrow. And I just alternate until I run out of tape. And I'm kind of zigzagging the blade a little bit just to give it some contours. Thing about birch trees is they're pretty gnarly, with the paper like bark sticking out all over the place. And I'm cutting on a clipboard, so I don't care if I damage it. And now I just start peeling off the tape. The first one, I just transport it directly over from the right side and lay it down haphazardly, really. And then I take the second piece and I turn it upside down, because remember, in the way that I cut it, I alternated narrow to thick. And I'll speed this up in a moment, but I just want to show you how to place the first few. And you don't want them all standing straight up. You kind of want to put some at an angle and maybe one's even bent over a little bit. And I do want to have some light shining through the trees, so I don't clump them all together too close, but close enough to make it look like a little forest. Now I'm going to apply that gum, that masking gum. Piebo, I think, is the brand. And I love this because the viscosity is just perfect for using a masking pen or a quill. It doesn't gum up, which impedes laying down the masking. But it flows just like it's ink. And again, I'll speed this up in a moment, but I just want to show you how I go about doing it. And I'm not really thinking about it. I'm just strategically laying down branches here and there. With birch trees, they might have a few branches at the bottom. Most of the branches are near the top. So I'm putting in some random bottom branches. Of course, they're thicker than the ones that are near to the top. Those will be quite thin. So the same thing with trees. You want your branches to be narrow at the end and thick as they connect to the tree. And just going all over the place, trying to keep in mind that some of these branches specifically come from a certain tree. You want it to make sense. Okay, now that the masking is dried, I'm using a cheap hair sprayer with water. And I like this brand. I forget what it is. You can get it on eBay or Amazon. And it creates a nice wide mist. And then I'm taking this Chinese hairbrush and I'm just brushing the water into all the nooks and crannies of the watercolor paper. And the reason why I use 140 pound instead of 300 pound is because I want those nooks and crannies. 300 pound watercolor paper doesn't have the texture that I'm after. Now I'm using cadmium yellow, and this is going to be where the sun, the evening sun, late afternoon, early evening sun, is bleeding in through the trees in this little forest. Just creating a horizon. A lot of it will be covered up later. But what's nice about it is that it will mix with those three greens. Now I'm using brilliant pink. Oh, by the way, I use kind of expensive watercolor from the tube. Again, just buy the best you can afford. Now this pink kind of cools off the sky a little bit, indicating it's cold. gives a nice twilight effect. Now I'm putting in some permanent orange. That's going to be around the sun. This will give it some warmth. Then I take a small battery that you would use for a watch, for instance, and I wrap it in a piece of paper towel, and then I'll just press it down where I want the sun to be. Now in this painting I waited too long to do this, and so it doesn't pick up all the color, leaving the white behind. So you can either use water or this lifting fluid by Winsor and Newton. I don't use this very often, but it comes in handy when you need it. And with a dedicated brush, I just rub it into the paper, and then I blot it with a paper towel. I'll do this a couple of times until it's white again. And you can use water to do this. It's just that the lifting fluid is a little more powerful, and I don't have to do it as often. There we go. A little more orange. I actually meant to change brushes. I'm using my dedicated brush for the lifting fluid, but that's okay. And I'll just put some around to the left and to the right, mixing it with the yellow or adding in yellow here and there. So I'm using a porcelain tray. It mixes well. I like this better than plastic trays. So here I'm putting down the greens that we talked about earlier. Darkest on the left and then lightest to the right. This is Azo green. Nice warm yellow. And so I mix some water into the pigment and I try to get it to the consistency of milk, because I want it to go on a little bit thick. but not too heavy. And I apologize for the lighting because this painting is going to be showing a lot lighter in shade than it actually is. And I just randomly put in some foliage here and there. I don't want to fill it in too heavily because I want to have areas where I can put in different greens and mix with the yellows. By the way, I'm using Holbein watercolor pigments and M. Graham, and my favorite one is Daniel Smith. Most of these pigments that I use are from Daniel Smith. I think they're the best. They're the best in vibrancy and the materials that they use to create them. And they have a huge assortment of colors. So now I'm just mixing in some watery azo green to mix with some of the greens that I've already put down. And I'm using a little spritzer right here. And I'm going to blend it with water, just spraying it sporadically around the sun. You can get these little bottles on Amazon. Just fill it with water. Now I'm tilting it in all directions to get it to bleed. You can see the water running. It's a kind of almost a controlled kind of effect, but it does have a mind of its own here and there. But that's great because you always end up with these accidents that you didn't plan, but they really come out awesome. I just do a little more blending with a dry brush. And the effect I'm shooting for is bright in the middle, and as it fans out, it gets darker. And I'm using a tilted desk. It's not tilted very much, but a lot of my paintings take advantage of that. The beauty about watercolor is you can use things like gravity, and it's free, and it creates these awesome washes. Just a little more blending. Now you can see why I use the masking fluid. A little more tilting, 90-degree angles. Just let it go where it wants to. Help it a little bit if you need to. Break up some of the beads. So I let it dry for about 45 minutes. You can use a hair dryer to speed it up, but I like to let it dry naturally. You can also use an embossing tool at a low setting if you just want to blow some of the beaded water around, or you can use the heat setting to dry it off. A little more spritzing. Just kind of blend the ground a little bit. Now I'm going to go for the snow. And I just love this Brilliant Pink by Daniel Smith. And I just create a shadow with it. Snow is never just pure white. It's always reflecting some color. Color of the sky even. In most of my watercolors, I don't use any white paint at all. I just use the paper itself as my white. But when I do want to use a white pigment, I go for the gouache. You can use acrylic white as well and mix it with your pigments. It dries fast. And now I'm drawing in with the paint some shadowed snow, which is usually of a bluish value. I'm using Prussian blue, again, Daniel Smith. So now you want to start peeling off the tapes after everything is dried. Make sure it's dry. And when you pull the tape, pull it down slowly and at sharp angles. It's almost perpendicular to the paper. Otherwise, you'll lift the paper with the tape, and you don't want to do that. Especially with the 3M masking tape right here. This is high tack. Some of the masking coming off with it. It's already beginning to come alive. You just use a finger. I don't use a sponge or an eraser. I just take my finger. That's what I love about this masking fluid. It's so easy to work with. I could just use my fingers. Just rub it all off. Push it aside. This is the tedious part. It can be fun, but it is tedious because you got all these trees that you individually have to paint to show the bark, typical that you would see on a birch tree with these black flashings. So I'm going to paint a few of them in real time, and then I'll speed it up for you. You can go to the internet, you can pull up some pictures of birch trees, or you can just use your imagination, which is what I'm doing right now. I've seen so many of them. When I have a birch tree that's in front of another one, I like to make it stand out a little bit, so I will make sure I've got some black bark on the side that is covering the tree behind it. again, if you look at this painting, the greens look very light. First of all, when you put down watercolor, you may think it's dark enough, but after it dries, it's at least going to end up being one or more shades lighter. And so you may have to repeat it. Or you could just go thick, but I don't like to go thick because it's harder to fix. So if I'm going to be dissatisfied with the darks, I'll just paint over them one or two more times until I get what I want. But in this case, with the bright light on the left, it's showing this composition a lot brighter, lighter than it really is. At the end of this video, I think I put a picture of it in the beginning as well. It'll give a better representation of what it actually ended up looking like. So I'll just finish this tree and start on the next one, and then I'll speed it up. We'll get through this a little quicker. But you can see what I mean. It takes time. But you can have fun at the same time. Individually painting each tree to have character of its own. Okay, let's speed this up. For the large branches, I'll paint a line of color. Van Dyke brown is the color that I use. And then for distant branches, I'll use a mixture of Van Dyke brown and Payne's gray. This is Lunar Blue, Daniel Smith again, and Payne's gray. And I'm just going to use a little Payne's gray with a lot of Lunar Blue. And this is going to create the shaded part of the tree, facing away from the sun, facing the viewer. And you want to make these trees have like a 3D effect. So, in the center of each tree, you'll have its darkest value. And as you go to the left and right, it'll be lighter. For the clump of trees on the left, I'm going to leave the right side of the trees with some white. And on the right side, the right clump of trees, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to leave the left side of the trees with some white. And then later on, I'll add some pink and yellow to show reflection from the sun. But be thinking about that when you're painting this on the center of the trees. It's going to be darkest in the middle, and overall the bottoms of the trees, especially in the background, will be dark, as well as some of the tops. Okay, we'll fast forward this process. So now I'm taking some Van Dyke Brown with some water because I don't want them too dark as they rest in front of the sun. Dark in areas, but lighter in others. Especially the branches farthest away. Those will be the lightest in color. But you can see the branches that are coming out of the two birch trees in the forefront. Those will be dark because they're closest to the viewer. So you make them stand out a little bit. Let me just speed this up a little. I love making branches and twigs. Very interesting. As you're painting, you don't want to just create lines. It makes for a very boring tree. But you get all these fingers that are gnarled, bent, crooked. Okay, so now I'm taking some Prussian blue, which is a very vibrant blue. And I'm just hitting some of the trees in the shade just to cool them off. If you mix Prussian blue, alizarin, crimson, and Van Dyke brown, you get the most beautiful black. And by varying the amounts, you get different shades or tones of the black. Okay, so now I'm taking some azo yellow. With a touch of jadeite green. And what had happened is I went crazy with the foliage and I didn't leave myself enough breaks in it to let the sun shine through. So now I have to go back and add them in. Brightening up the area around the sun the most. I don't want to use white because the sky isn't white. The sky it's got this twilight color to it. Yellow, orange, maybe a little red. So I'm taking some white gouache, a little on the thick side, and I'm going to paint the center of the sun to make it pop, make it stand out. I think I'm being too careful around the branches. I could always paint over the branches again. But anyways, I just water it down a little bit more, paint it around the sun, make it nice and bright. Mix some brilliant pink into that white. Paint some of the branches. Giving off a reflection, especially in the two foreground trees. And even the sky. A little too much, so I'll just blend it with the paint that's already there. So it's not too pink in the sky. And I don't use a lot. I just want to be selective about the brighter areas appearing through all this foliage and these branches and some leaves. And if it's too bright, I can just dull it by mixing it with the color underneath. Because I don't want the viewer to focus on the bright areas. I really want him or her to focus on the sun and those two trees in the front. I ended up painting over some of the branches, so I'll just freshen them up with a little more paint. Some Van Dyke brown. You kind of have to know the origin of the branches, so you carry them through up into the sky. You don't want branches just appearing out of nowhere. They kind of have to make sense. So this is kind of a long video. It's about an hour, just under an hour. And I'm speeding up areas that I think I can get away with. But I also want to spend time languishing on some of the details to make sure that you're getting benefit from what I'm trying to show you. Okay, I'm going to mix some of that yellow with the serpentine green. And, the time of year could be late September, early October, depending on where you live. If you're from New England, we get snow late October, early November on rare occasions, so you'll still have grass with a freshly fallen snow out in the fields and a little bit in the forest where it's fallen through the trees. So I'm painting those highlights right here. So I first lay down where I want the snow to show up, but then I'll do some blending so that it doesn't stick out like it does right now, by tilting the brush and just lightly passing it along the paper, letting those nooks and crannies give it some texture. So we have about 8 minutes left in this painting. But I don't want to speed it up at this point, because I really want to show you exactly what I'm doing to give this snow a realistic look. So right beneath the sun, you might have a meadow. So the snow, as it fades away from you, will be a little grayer than the snow closest to you. I'm going to use some ultramarine blue. So I did actually use some. And we're going to create the shaded bits of snow, as you would see in any snowbank. I take that back. This is actually Prussian blue. I didn't use ultramarine blue in this painting. And you want to kind of cover some of the trees at the trunk as they go into the ground. Here I'm just creating some drifts. So by tilting the brush at an angle and swiping it against the paper, you'll pick up those nooks and crannies, giving the snow some texture. You just want to make sure your brush has paint on it that's dried off. So what I do is I dip it into the tray and then I tap it onto a piece of paper towel. Okay, now I want to load up the centerpiece of the painting with a lot of little branches and twigs. And I'm using a watery Van Dyke brown for this part of it, as I talked about earlier. And we're going to end it all with some grass or some reeds popping out through the surface of the snow. Again, being very random. Not every blade of grass is straight or bent over or crooked or broken. And then I take a toothbrush and I dip it into the pigment. In this case, I'm going to use some Prussian blue. Some watery Prussian blue. And I charge the toothbrush bristles with it so it's real full. And then I flick my thumb from front to back into the tray to get rid of most of the water. Otherwise, when you go directly to the paper without doing that, you're going to have these big globs of pigment. I really want like a little mist. And this is just creating some texture. And then I'll dip it into Van Dyke brown. Again, charging the bristles so they're nice and full of pigment. Watery pigment. Flick it off into the tray a couple times to get most of the water off the bristles so you don't end up with these big brown globs all over your beautiful trees. You just want to have these little specks. And when you're done, just sign your name. And I chose the left side because I don't want to take away from the foreground trees. And it kind of blends in with the reeds or the grass sticking out through the snow. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. God bless.